Okay, welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm Peter Wilk with Physicians for Social Responsibility and Back from the Brink, and I'm facilitating this workshop. It's been a fabulous day so far, great turnout, excellent panel presentations, really found the questions and answers very informative. Hope that you did as well. I hope that there were many congressional staffers and members of the press in attendance, which was our intent. And now many dozens of you have joined this workshop, which is wonderful. But this also does present a few challenges for us. With so many of you participating, we've decided to establish the following structure. You'll all be kept on mute until we split up into 3 breakout rooms. Michelle and Alan, who I will introduce in a moment, will start things off with a 15-minute presentation. While they're presenting, there are going to be some slides to be sharing, and the chat function is open already for you to submit brief questions in writing that will come to me, Michelle, and Alan. After their initial presentations, I'll be, actually while it's going on, reviewing the questions, keeping track of them, and I will ask Michelle and Alan as many of the questions as they can respond to in what we estimate will be about 20 minutes remaining at that point. Please feel free to keep submitting your written questions while the Q&A is continuing, because we are going to try to arrange to have responses later by email. Some of them may be individually, some of them may be group responses, but we will get back to you. At the end of the Q&A, Alan's going to explain how the breakout sessions will work. I'm now going to introduce Michelle Fuji, Legislative Fellow for Nuclear Disarmament and Pentagon Spending at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and Alan Hester, Grassroots and Policy Coordinator with the Nuclear Weapons Abolition Program at Physicians for Social Responsibility. Let's get started.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Peter, and hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you all today. So before we jump into the legislation and tips on how to work with your members of Congress, we wanted to give everyone the chance to find your representatives and senators in case you don't know who they are, since the whole point of this workshop is to help you work with your members of Congress. I'm going to drop 2 links into the chat, and we'll take a couple of minutes right now to let everyone find their members. Here we go. Okay. So for people who've just entered, we're just taking a couple minutes right now to find your representatives and senators, and the links to do that is in the chat. Okay. I'm now going to hand it over to Alan to talk about what bills we are paying attention to right now.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And in advance, I want to apologize if you hear my dog barking in the background. He's very upset I had to put him in another part of the house. So I apologize if there's background noise. And as a preface for the legislation that we'll be going over today, this by no means encompasses all of the nuclear weapons issues that we could talk about in all the legislation that's out there. There will be some organizations who focus on others, but I thought for today we would focus on legislation that was most directly linked with the goals of Back from the Brink. So with that, I'll get started first by going over no first use. So for the legislation here, we're going to focus on Adam Smith and Elizabeth Warren's no first use legislation. And this bill is a one-sentence bill that reads, "It is the policy of the United States to not use nuclear weapons first." So currently, the US maintains the right to use nuclear weapons first if it believes it's faced with threats that it views as existential. So this could be the cyber realm, chemical weapons, biological weapons attacks. And this would change our official policy to only using nuclear weapons in the event of a nuclear attack against the United States. Next, we'll talk about presidential sole authority. The legislation here is going to be Restricting First Use of Nuclear Weapons Act, and this is introduced by Senator Markey and Representative Liu. And despite using similar first use language, the bill is distinct from the other no first use bill. This bill would make it so that before a nuclear weapon could be launched first by the United States, Congress would have to issue a declaration of war. And within that declaration of war, it would have to authorize that first strike as part of the declaration. So this bill leans more into the argument that the Constitution explicitly gives Congress the sole power to declare war, and that a nuclear first strike without that declaration would be unconstitutional. Next, we have Cancel Enhanced Weapons. The bill here is going to be Investing in Cures Before Missiles Act. This is a new bill that is emerging in this Congress for the first time, and it's going to be introduced by Representative Khanna and Senator Markey. There are already plans underway to replace and modernize the land-based component of our triad at the tune of billions of dollars. And these new missiles are referred to as the ground-based strategic deterrent. But the important part here is that there are plans to build new missiles designed to replace existing missiles that already work. And every time that the existing missiles are launched in practice runs, they hit the target every single time. So the bill essentially says experts don't think we need to have these new missiles. They're too expensive. We don't need expensive new missiles that replace missiles that already work. And we don't need to spend billions of dollars on nuclear weapons in the middle of a deadly pandemic. And that all of our resources currently should be focused on recovering from the current crisis and defending against the threats of infectious disease. So if this bill was passed in 2021, it would extend the current missiles that we already have, and it would redirect money that's planned on these new missiles to the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases to support research for the development of a universal coronavirus vaccine. And in 2022, it would prohibit funds from being authorized on these new missile modifications, while also calling for a study to verify how long we could extend our current missiles before having to commit to expensive modernization efforts. And it sends a clear message to Congress that we want them to protect us against current threats and future pandemics instead of funding expensive weapons programs that we can never realistically use. And finally, we have Pursuing Global Elimination. And the legislation I tried to focus on here was this House resolution introduced by Representative McGovern, which is embracing the goals and provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This resolution first calls on the president to embrace the goals and provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and makes nuclear disarmament the centerpiece of US national security policy. And second, it calls on the United States to lead a global effort to prevent nuclear war. The resolution specifically mentions all 5 parts of the Back from the Brink platform, including no first use, sole authority, ending hair trigger alert, canceling modernization plans, and actively pursuing verifiable multilateral agreements among nuclear armed states. And as it says in the beginning of the bill, it specifically points to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons as an example for that kind of multilateral structure. So now I'm going to hand it off to Michelle to talk about lobbying tips.
Thanks for that review of legislation, Alan. So now you might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all the details and the technical language related to these bills. I know I still am. So I want to share some lobbying tips I've learned and how I like to think about these issues. So first, I want you to ask yourself, what is my story? Why do I care about these issues? Maybe you're a teacher and you care a lot about your students' future and you're worried about the effects of a potential nuclear arms race. Or maybe you're a parent and you're, think it's unethical to threaten other people's children. with weapons of mass destruction. Members of Congress really care about what their constituents think. And your connections in your community are a way to demonstrate your weightiness or why your representatives should care about your perspective. So these connections in your community might be your church or your school or a local organization you're a part of. So I really want you to think about your role in your community and how it can connect to nuclear weapons. While nuclear weapons may seem like a technical and distant topic, I think it is intensely personal and intersects with many other issues. These are weapons designed to kill millions of civilians, and historically and currently, they're weapons that harm people of color and many indigenous communities. And the use and production also harm the environment and thus communities. Also, it is a very expensive weapon. Maybe you think we shouldn't spend so much of our taxpayer dollars on weapons of mass destruction, and especially when we're struggling to fund COVID relief and solutions to climate change. Next slide, please. So now you know who your representatives are, what bills we're paying attention to, and how to make your perspective relevant to the discussion. And I think the last step here is to make contact with your members. There are many ways to do this, from writing letters to op-eds. You can call your member on the phone, and you can also request a meeting. And having a meeting or a lobby visit gives you a chance to also hear from your member about what they think, and also it gives you a chance to ask follow-up questions. And it's also a really good way to build a relationship with your member of Congress so they can see your face and know who you are. And it's also a great way to engage other people in your community who care about this issue. You can gather together, discuss the issue, and then meet your representative together. And so now I'm going to share some resources to help prepare for a lobby visit and to structure your lobby visit. And these are also available on the event registration page, either now or after this workshop. And so I welcome you to visit the page and find these resources later. I'm just going to drop them in the chat right now. So the links I dropped are lobby trainings we offer at Defense Committee on National Legislation, some step-by-step guides, and a lobby visit roadmap. And so the roadmap is something I really encourage you to make if you were to have a visit with your member, because it will help you to structure a visit. For example, to think about what specific thing you can thank your legislator for, whether that's a different bill they voted for that you support, to very clearly state your lobby ask, and to assign roles such as who is the note taker, who will be telling their stories, and what specific follow-up questions you may have. So also another point I want to mention is that even though we can't do lobby visits in person, we have this very handy thing called Zoom. So many offices are happy to meet in this way. And some may also schedule meetings via conference call. And, thinking about this virtual world, I think the most important thing to remember is that it's very hard to read body language. So when you're not in person, it's very important to assign those roles, especially a group leader if you're doing a visit in a group, to help move along the conversation. For example, you may say, I'm now going to hand it over to Michelle to tell us why this issue is important to her. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alan.
Thank you, Michelle. And just to kind of put some concrete examples around these themes and these tips that we're talking about, I wanted to give one example of success story from a meeting that we had from PSR back in 2019, working with allies, of course. This was a meeting led by Denise Duffield, who you heard speak earlier today, focused on getting Adam Schiff, Representative Adam Schiff, to co-sponsor the no first use legislation that I talked about. And this was a really amazing meeting as an example of how to go above and beyond to get a co-sponsorship for the legislation that you want to see your representatives support. So the first thing was that the date of the meeting was significant. So the date fell in August of 2019, specifically on the anniversary of the attacks on Hiroshima. And this was automatically a great entry point for the activists to talk about this issue in a way that is removed from the strict international relations, security, deterrence kind of thinking, and house it more in a personal story about what these weapons are and what they do to people. And they were able to use that narrative of the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I think, in their advocacy meeting overall. They also had put in previous work into passing a local resolution within Schiff's district. So they had a resolution that they could say, if you think we're the only ones that care about this issue, you're wrong. We have an entire group of support within your district. We've already passed a local resolution that includes no first use as part of the nuclear weapons issues that your constituents are concerned about. And I think that really adds a lot of validity because now you're not just in there with 5 or 6 different advocates in that office, you're backed up by an entire group of activists that aren't in the room, but that we're all working together on this separate initiative that covers no first use, which is what they were there to talk about. And then finally, the people they brought to the meeting was a wide variety of perspectives represented. So you had Denise, who was covering the health perspective of this issue, but she was standing alongside veterans and students who were coming at the exact same issue, but in different ways and with different stories. And I think that is just another example of saying that there are a wide variety of constituents in this district that care about this issue, which empowers that congressperson to move forward and support legislation around nuclear disarmament. And with that, I think I'll yield the time for questions.
Thank you so much, Alan and Michelle, for kicking that off. So the chat is open for questions and would really appreciate folks submitting some to keep this conversation going. It's a time that's challenging. There's so many issues to focus on, and Alan and Michelle have given us some tips on how to focus, particularly on connecting nuclear weapons issues with other issues that your congressperson, senator, their staff might be concerned about, and your local community. So we're really trying to emphasize that. The first question here is from Alan Ware, and his question is, and I guess it's to both of you. It's a little bit of an inside baseball question, but I'm going to throw it to you. There used to be a Monday lobby group facilitated by FCNL where DC-focused arms control and disarmament organizations would meet to discuss congressional measures. Is there still something like this?
Thank you, Alan, for that question. I don't know of a Monday lobby meeting. I think maybe that's not something we do anymore, but we have lobby trainings for people who want to lobby, and FCNL is part of a broader coalition of organizations working on disarmament and nuclear policy. And yeah, we always welcome constituents to get involved. Yeah, and I'm also new at FCNL, so I may not know some of that history. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. So a second question is from Joe Scary. And while I read that question in a moment, I can see that Deb Sawyer, who I'm afraid I don't know, has raised her hand. And Deb, can you please type your question into the chat box? Thanks so much, Deb. Okay, Joe. Let's see. His question begins with a compliment. Great presentation. Please say more if I were to go in to meet, with my congressperson about the bills that have been outlined, how do I find out how much they know already about the issue and if their member supports the bill? So that's for either of you.
Yeah, I can start with that. I think that's a really good question in the sense that that should be one of the first things that you ask when you go into these meetings. So you're going to obviously go in and I think start off by saying, hey, we're here to meet around nuclear weapons reform issues. And then whether you're talking to a staff person or talking to a representative, it's good to say, you know, what I just kind of like to ask you, what is your stance on these issues? You know, what committees are you involved in that talk about these issues? And that staff person or that representative will clarify, you know, how familiar they are with these topics. And that's a really important question because so many of these representatives and senators you're going to find, unless they sit on a committee that's talking about nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons budget all the time, they might not really be thinking about this issue that much. So it's really important that when you go into these meetings, you might have to prepare yourself to really lay out, you know, the urgency of the situation, the urgency of the issue to these Congress people who might never really think about these issues as much as you might think they are because they're in positions of power. So it's really good to start off the conversation with where are you at? Where is your perspective? Because that's going to guide how you move that conversation forward.
Great. Shall we leave it at that? Or you have anything to add, Michelle?
We can go to the next question.
Okay, the next one is from Alfred Meyer. And he asks, can you describe the importance of working with a congressperson's home office and their Washington staff who handle the topic at hand as a mechanism for an ongoing conversation with the elected official through their way they set up their office? Either of you.
Alan, I'll let you take this one.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I think it's important. It's very important, and the better you can get at working with both offices it's better because you can start to say, well, you know, I've talked with you know, the staff person in district, and here's what they're telling me about the congressperson's perspective and their perspective on the issue, and that might differ from the staff person at the Washington D.C. office. I think the flip side of that is, you know, the people that work in DC, I think, lean more towards the DC thinking, right? Which is the standard security policy, you know, what they're hearing from other members in committees. I think there's a lot more groupthink in the DC offices, where when you go to these home offices, I think it's much more likely that you're going to have the potential for a more local kind of personal interaction around the issue. Especially, I think this is why developing skills of bringing an issue like this that's so global and so national with its context, and bringing it to your local office with local context, with local members of your community, is really the best way to get your member and their staff to go, we have to start paying attention to this. So there is, I think, value in talking with both and relaying with both offices what you're learning through talking with both offices.
Great. I think that's absolutely the right idea. Next question. Jeff Huey asks for recommendations for the best website or perhaps websites for checking a rep or senator's voting record on particular bills. Is there one particular site that you'd recommend? Either of you?
I mean, I'll just say the one that I constantly like to go to is just direct links to the bills that you care about. So if you go to, I think that's just congress.gov, where all these bills are listed. And I know that all of the legislation that I brought up today will be included with links to those pages directly to the bill on the resources page that Michelle brought up earlier. So you can go find these links directly to all this legislation. You can also find them pretty easily by Googling the bill number that you saw come up on the slides that you'll be able to find after this. But going to us.gov or congress.gov and finding the bill that you care about, and then there should be a co-sponsors tab alongside the text of the bill that will tell you, here's all the names of the offices that have co-sponsored. And if you see that your representative or senator isn't on it, that's a really great thing to bring up to them, saying that I went to the bill number, I went and checked if you were a co-sponsor, saw that your name wasn't there, and I'd like that to change. That's a really great way for them to start investigating the bill that you care about.
Great. And so here's a question that is really a request, which is post congressional bills on the nuclear weapons issues in the chat. It may be a little, we can do that, but what's going to be easiest probably in the long run is that the slide deck is going to be available that was shared earlier with all of you, and that has the bill numbers on it. And I think there's one bill on there that doesn't have a number yet, but once it does have a number, that will get added to the slide deck. Next question sort of is similar. Actually, it is from Deb Sawyer, wondering if bills that were introduced in earlier sessions use the same numbers, and I think they do not. I think they get a new number when they get introduced. And I see you nodding, Alan. Is that correct?
I think it depends. I think the hope with most offices is it's for convenience sake. They'd like it to keep the same number, but that isn't always how it happens. So that's why I prefaced in the beginning that while we expect all of these pieces of legislation, including ones that have been introduced in previous Congresses, to be reintroduced, I can't necessarily commit that they'll maintain the same bill numbers when they're reintroduced officially.
And then this one from Dennis Wong, it's a little bit open-ended. We'll see what you do with it. It's about ideology. It is the frame. It's from Dennis Wong. What are the differences between Republicans and Democrats, broadly speaking, I suppose, on the issue of nuclear weapons? He notes that he lives in a blue state, so that may make him more fortunate, but take it away.
Sure, I can take a crack at this. I would say there are a lot, well, I guess, yeah, I would start with there are a lot of similarities in the sense that members are often very concerned about, looking strong on defense. So I think it's very important to bring into the conversation how we should have a broader definition of defense, national security, what makes us safe. So that's definitely, I think, a starting point in that conversation. But yeah, Alan, do you want to say more about the differences?
Well, this is the interesting thing about this issue, is that while so many issues today are really mired in complete different ideologies, right, between the different aisles of Congress, this is one that I think we see remarkably similar messaging across the aisles when we're meeting with Congress people, right, which is I am concerned with keeping the United States safe, and I believe that nuclear weapons are, somehow helping us with keeping the United States safe. That is the kind of common cultural assumption with these things ever since, the end of World War II has led us to believe that the bomb was what saved us from that war continuing. So there's a cultural understanding there that I think does actually go across the aisles. I think that the fundamental difference would be if I was meeting with a blue office, I think they might be much more open to hearing, the humanity on the issue, right? The human perspective of well, what does a nuclear war look like? What's the loss of life look like? The insustainability of this deterrence, right? Of deterrence theory being something that works until it doesn't, right? They're much more open, I think, to those ideas, where if I was meeting with a Republican office, what I might focus more on is cost, right? Do we need to spend this amount of money to keep the United States safe? And if not, how do we cut that in such a way that safety is maintained? Or, even better, I might make the case of why, despite what they've heard, certain policy decisions actually makes us less safe. For example, the low yield nuclear weapon that was brought up earlier, I might say, well, actually, if you deploy this weapon, it's going to blur the lines and it's going to make Russia more likely to revert to nuclear weapons in response if they think that if they see a missile coming in and they're not sure if it's a conventional missile or a nuclear missile, it's more likely that they're going to jump to the conclusion that it's nuclear and launch their own attack. So I think that there's actually a remarkable amount of similarities, but I think the angles in which you approach an office can change, not just based on which side of the aisle they're on, but also on what committees they already sit on, because that shows what issues they really care about.
Great, thanks. So there are a couple of questions here that in a way are a little bit in the weeds in terms of locality, but I think, or particular legislation, but I think it's useful. On the one hand, we had to set this up in a fairly structured way because there's so many of you, but there is an intent really that it's activating you to get more engaged. And so there's a networking aspect to all of this as well. And so you'll hear more from us if you participated in this workshop. If you participate in this conference, you're likely to get some more email inviting you to do some more things. So here's one invitation that's from Peace Action. Peace Action is interested in convening grassroots organizing around the ground-based strategic deterrent with groups and activists in the Great Plains Rocky Mountains region. If you're interested, and there's going to be a lot about this nationally as well, but if you live in that region, contact Kevin Martin at kmartin@peaceaction.org. Similarly, a question, and somebody could just, I don't know how we'll try to get back to you. It's a question from Arizona about working with groups to clean up and prevent uranium mining. Let's see. One more from, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce the name properly. My apologies. Hiraoki Nakanishi, lobbying to rebuild post-INF framework with China, or is Indo-Pacific INF framework possible to ban intermediate nuclear forces or deployment of intermediate ballistic missiles in that region? Thanks.
So I think that this is a really interesting point, and I'll speak more broadly, I think, to what the question's getting at, which is there's been a constant talk, I think, since Trump was president about how does China need to be pulled into the conversation with any kind of multilateral agreement, right? I think that came from more and more treaties between the US and Russia falling to the wayside, and leaving the door open to new arms control agreements that may include China. And while I think that it's very important that we understand, why China is being encouraged to come and join these conversations, and more importantly, that I think the theme of what we heard this morning, right, was that multilateral agreements that are verifiable is how we get to zero. That being said, I think the challenges with anything involving pulling China in is that it's going to always be looked at as a numbers game for them, right? So they're going to look at anything that says the US wants you to join this meeting or Russia wants you to join this meeting. China's going to turn the tables back and say the US and Russia have thousands of weapons. So why should we, a country that has a few hundred nuclear weapons, join this conversation? And more importantly, they're going to use that to say, until Russia and the United States bring their numbers of nuclear weapons down, we're not going to participate. So I do want to just highlight that I think that conversation about including China is going to continue in all multilateral agreements moving forward. It's going to be hard for me to imagine Biden, for example, not bringing up China with anything nuclear arms control. That being said, I think there's going to be immense challenges of bringing them in until Russia and the United States signal that they're willing to bring down their nuclear weapons numbers significantly. But I'll open it up to Michelle if she has anything to add.
I think you covered most of it, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a time check. According to our pre-planning, we wanted to switch soon to the breakout sessions, which still are going to be fairly large, but we still wanted to have some more small group process. So I'm going to let Alan explain that, but before he does, either of you have anything further you want to sum up to the large group? Michelle? No? Alan?
No,
Okay.
I'm really excited to go into these breakout groups.
Okay, Alan, you want to explain how they're going to work? And
Yeah.
Note that, I think it's going to be somewhat automated from Paul. Our technical host may switch us when Alan finishes his explanation into the breakout groups. They'll then operate for about 10 minutes, and I think they will simply end at that point. You'll get a break before you go to your next workshop session 15 minutes later. So, Alan.
Great. So yeah, we wanted to get some interactive part of this workshop despite being digital. And you'll remember that some of the themes that Michelle touched on earlier were things like making the issue local, connecting this issue to your community, or connecting it to your own unique personal story of why you care about this issue. I think, in other words, what's your story that got you into that office talking with that representative? So in these breakout sessions, we're going to do a little bit of role play where Peter, myself, and Michelle will all act as your representative that you've gotten a Zoom call with to talk about nuclear weapons issues. You don't have to link to specific bills because we know you just heard about a lot of them, but just we want you to role play. If you were going into an office to talk about nuclear weapons issues, how would you introduce yourself and the issue to that congressperson in a way that's going to resonate with them? So that's what these breakout sessions are going to be about. Your challenge is to make it personal, make it local, and link nuclear weapons to other issues that you care about. So that's going to be the main goal of the breakout sessions, which I think we can get thrown into at any time.
Thanks. See you soon in a breakout session.